Welcome to Chalk and Code.
where the science of learning meets modern technology.
We're bringing together entrepreneurs, product leaders, researchers, and advocates
To spark ideas, challenge assumptions, and shape the future of learning. So, welcome to Chalk and Code, where we explore new and novel directions in education, technology, and leadership. Today's guest is Dr. Victor Winter, professor in the Department of Computer Science at the University of Nebraska Omaha and founder of Bricklayer.org. Bricklayer is an educational platform that teaches computational thinking, math, and computer science through a unique combination of art and coding. Using virtual bricks inspired by Lego and Minecraft, students learn to write code by building 3D artifacts, making programming visual, creative, and accessible to learners. Dr. Winter joins us today to discuss reimagining computer science education, the power of teaching programming through art, and how Bricklayer is helping students of all ages develop critical thinking and computational skills in a way that's both intuitive and engaging. Dr. Winter, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure to be here.
So, given your unique background as a computer science professor and a former leader of a high-integrity software project at Sandia National Labs, how did that experience inform your belief that there was a new approach needed to teaching programming?
So, so a lot of this coming out of Sandia National Laboratories, right? You work with what's called ultra high consequence systems. So historically, fun fact is that Sandia has built the nation's nuclear arsenal, and to this day has stewardship over it. So they care a whole lot about things that are actually working correctly. So if you go back, a couple like to the 80s or the 90s when PCs and this kind of stuff was hitting the market, it was very common to have this blue screen of death, right, where the machine locks up. So this is not acceptable in the nuclear theater, right? You can't have that because it sort of translates into a blinding white flash, right? And that is a bad thing. But at the same time, technology is advancing, and you can't kind of turn your back on computers and say tech can never play in this space. So they worried a whole lot about using tech in a safe and understandable way. And so then that gets into being able to reason about code and to make sure that it has the desired properties, that it does what it's supposed to do and doesn't do bad things. So that's sort of the starting point. And so when I left Sandia and came to the University of Nebraska at Omaha, the first course that I was teaching was about programming languages. And so there are sort of different dialects of programming languages. And initially, a programming language was designed to sort of raise the abstractions of the machine. If you think back to Alan Turing, right, you have these really primitive kinds of machines, and people were plugging in wires or whatnot. And so you kind of want to raise that level of abstraction that you don't have to do this directly. So you get these very low-level programming languages, and then there's sort of this legacy that happens. You build on top of that, you build on top of that. And at the end of the day, what you have is you have a language that is well aligned with how the computer does computation and not so well aligned with how humans think about computation. Those are different. And so there's different kinds of programming languages. And so one kind of programming language style is called functional programming. And that is very aligned with mathematicians, how mathematicians think. And it came from a different universe altogether, right? These functional programming languages, they were not connected to the machine, not driven by that. They were driven by math, kind of. And so it's much easier to think about them. And they have all kinds of wonderful properties that I can tell you. And of course, they have some drawbacks too, right? All languages sort of have pros and cons. But so when I was teaching my programming languages class, I realized that the kids didn't have a deep enough understanding of how code executes and what's going on. And so that led me to, I want to catch them early on. I want their first programming language when they get first exposed to programming. I want it to be in a clean programming language, a functional programming language. So that's sort of the starting point. And if I was going to give sort of the non-technical listeners some intuition here, think of, I'm going to teach you how to do division, long division, and I can either pick Arabic numbers or Roman numbers. Does anybody here want to learn how to do long division using Roman numerals? I don't even know. I mean, I'm sure it could be done, right? But that would be enormously hard, not because division is hard, which to some extent is complex, right? But it's not that. It's sort of this incidental. It's the nature of the how you express stuff. That's the consequence here, right? So if you pick a better way of representing numbers, you can do things much more easily. And it's the same thing with coding. If you can pick a better programming language that where your thoughts are clearer, you can express your ideas more clearly. So that's sort of my sales pitch for why functional programming. And then as a freshman class, it's kind of hard to teach certain concepts in there. And so that's where Bricklayer then came into being, right? So I was trying to figure out ways to teach them how to do stuff. And at one point, I kind of hit on this visual idea, right? That we could do this visual art and these kinds of things. And an interesting thing happened one day, right? I was kind of developing this curriculum as we go, and I wasn't prepared for the next meeting. And so I said, you know, I'd given them these little assignments the whole time to create these little visual things, right? And so I said, for the next assignment, just do whatever you want. And I said, form teams of 4, and oh, you're gonna do a presentation. Whatever you do, you're gonna show. And the students spent about 10 times more work than they had done the entire semester up until that point, because they had the freedom to build art, right? I was kind of teaching them mechanics. And so then it's like, oh, geez, you really have a lot of creativity here and personal investment. Because think of the thought experiment is this: I'm teaching you Python or Java or something as an introductory class. And I say, for the next assignment, code anything you like. What are the kids going to do? I wrote a program that reads in a number and converts it from Celsius to Fahrenheit. I mean, it's gonna be something like this, right? What else could you do, right? But if you add visual stuff to it, which you get right away, and there's other languages that do this too, right? You can have animations. So all of this whole visual space is enormously engaging, right? And so that's kind of was one of the draws about Bricklayer, that, geez, this really does work. Let's develop this further, right? And then I was going to teach a summer camp for high school kids or junior high school kids, and I decided I needed to make some things simpler. To the ability to express certain ideas needed to be easier for certain kinds of things, and so I kind of got onto this Lego model that I'm going to just have little building blocks, code pieces that do this kind of stuff, right? And while I was doing this, my kids were young at the time, and I had Lego all over the floor that you see behind me here, everywhere, thousands of pieces, and they would build stuff, little Lego things. Probably have one here that I can show. Yeah, I can show you one. Hold on a second. This is a stormtrooper, Star Wars. And this is, I don't know what this is. This is some kind of creature. Whoops, it's falling apart there a little bit. There. Right. So they would build these little creatures and stuff, and they would, this is many years ago. This is covered in dust now. They would hand them up and say, Dad, coat this up. Right. So I would get practices like what kind of stuff they like to express and how we would do this. And then they'd do little armies of these, right? And they'd stack, and I would be like frantically trying to figure out ways to make this kind of stuff easy to do. So that's kind of how Bricklayer kind of found its way into K-12, right? It's sort of that. And it's gone in a lot of different directions since then. So I do a freshman course on computational science. Mhm. Because what Bricklayer is, right? So imagine in 2D, imagine pixel art, right? You have a grid and you fill in each one of these squares with a color. And these grids can have patterns, right? You can have all kinds of fascinating patterns. You can have tessellations, you can have pentominoes, all this kind of stuff. And you can do this in 3D too, except it's not a square now, it's a cube, right? And so if you look at what goes on in science, there's a lot of science that's based on what's called cellular automata, which are these squares, right? So the way they would model heat is you have a grid, you have a cell that's hot, and you have some formula for how heat dissipates into the cells around it. And that's it. And then you kind of keep doing this, and that way you can see heat dissipating across surfaces. So another one that's really, really fun is it's called percolation. And so what you have is you have a grid. So imagine coffee grinds. You have coffee grinds, you've compressed them. You want to pour water on the top. It needs to find its way through the cracks, right, into the bottom. So that's percolation. So if you have a material, there's a certain density of empty pieces and coffee grounds, if you will, that if it's too dense, it's unlikely that pouring in water at the top reaches the bottom. And if it's less than that, there's a good chance, and so it is a very serious field of study in its own right and has all kinds of implications for material sciences and conductivity and stuff. Uh, but they're very cool visualizations, right? And they're all based on this kind of bricklayer stuff, right? So I have that. I even have for COVID, I did a simulator that lets you study infectious diseases under certain conditions, right? So you can say, what is the transmissibility rate of this disease, the R factor, right? R naught. You can say, what is the what is do you practice social distancing? Do you have masks? Do you have vaccinations? How reliable are the vaccinations? And then you can turn it loose on a population and see what happens, right? When do you reach herd immunity on something like this, right? So those are all kind of like more advanced extensions of what you can do with little cells like this, right? But at the kids level, we're talking about 3D printing. We're talking about pixel art, which is super, super fun, and Minecraft. It does tie into Minecraft. So you can one of the projects that I've done with groups is I create a city in Minecraft, and everybody gets a plot of land. They then code up what they want to put in that plot of land. They send me the program, and I put it into Minecraft, and then we all get to join that Minecraft world and run around in each other's houses and stuff. So that is incredibly fun. And it's incredibly motivating, right? So I had this one kid that wanted to do a castle, right? So 4 towers on the castle. And this is for a gifted group, right? So sharp kids. And so I'm looking at the castle, and I say, the tower that he's building, and I say, if you learn about this higher level of programming stuff, which I haven't taught you in this session, in this workshop yet, you could just do just do 4 of those right away without having to recode anything. And so then the kid goes, show me. Right. So then I take him off to the side. I give him sort of a 10-minute tutorial. He goes back, sits down. He comes back to me like 10 minutes later, show me again. And then by the evening, he sent me his castle where he had figured out how to do all of this. Right. And so Bricklayer has online stuff that lets you learn that on your own. Right. That's part of the goal of Bricklayers, that there should be enough there that if you're motivated and you want to learn on your own, you can. But also, you could think of this as a gym where you have weightlifting equipment. Yeah, you can go there and work out on your own, but having a trainer there can be very, very beneficial, right? And so I kind of see the role of teachers in this kind of thing is guides, motivators, this type of stuff, right? We have access to information. We have the greatest source of knowledge mankind ever had at everybody's fingertips. Where in the old days, right, you used to have to go to a pilgrimage to the Library of Alexandria and go up into some big tower somewhere to find some dusty book, right? And then more recently, right, the Dewey Decimal System, you go to the library and the book is checked out, or it's not, whatever, so it was hard to come by information in the past. You really had to work at it. Now it's trivial. Right. So it's not access to knowledge. That's the big thing. What it is motivation. You need to be inspired and motivated. Those are the key ingredients that the human element needs to bring to all of this.
Okay. Let's go back just for a moment because you mentioned a couple of things when you were describing kind of that light bulb moment that you had. Oh, it sounds like I wanna repeat it back to you, and you tell me if I've heard you correctly. You were teaching college students, freshmen, and you noticed that I wasn't quite clear when you were describing it, whether you noticed during the teaching or you came into the teaching already with this idea in mind that we need to make programming more visual because and it sounded like you were making the argument that we think visually, not necessarily in, math formulas.
Right. So it was a senior level class that I was teaching where I realized they didn't understand things. And so then I kind of backfilled, like, where do I fix this problem? Right. It's before we get to this class. So I kept rolling back, and the visual thing did not occur to me at first. And so I kind of stumbled across that. And part of it was, I think, Minecraft, working with these kinds of things. And I'm a very visual person. And I found that when I was in class, giving lectures for certain kind of things, I would draw pictures of stuff, and so that kind of so I was starting to head down that road, right? And then I tried the predecessor to the Bricklayer class was not visual and didn't work very well. And I thought it would, but it didn't. And so it was sort of like, okay, let's dust off and try this again. Let's do something that's gonna. So sort of that's how I got into this. And then once sort of I hit on that this is kind of a sweet spot, then it was just sort of pursuing this kind of stuff and developing it further. And so what ended up happening, so first it was just Bricklayer, this programming environment, and that was it. And there were no apps around it to help. And so we're in this after school class, and we had uh, highlighters and grid paper where students were supposed to. So here's an interesting exercise for somebody in the audience, right? You get graph paper. Actually, I have a link that you can do this too, but create a pattern. The trick of the pattern, right, is I get to hand this to somebody else and they get to continue working on it in the way that I envisioned, right? It, and two things can happen. The person you hand it to says, I don't see the pattern. I don't see how things are repeating. Or what you created isn't really a pattern, right? It looks cool. But what the algorithm is for repeating stuff is not there. Right. So it can be a profound thing. You can create patterns that are a fractal is a pattern that has a very, very complex underlying uh, algorithm behind it. Right. So, and then there's a checkerboard, like the simplest one is a checkerboard. That's a tessellation. Right. So you can do all kinds of stuff with patterns. And so that was sort of a starting point for us. Right. Because code, ultimately, the power of the machine is that it can do a million computational steps uh, very, very quickly. And you don't want to have to write a million lines of code to get it to do a million computational steps. You want to be able to write 10 lines of code to get it to do a million computational steps. And the only way that that's going to happen is if there's a pattern in computation, right? So it is all about recognizing patterns, and they're not all visual, right? This could be numerical patterns of what's going on with the data and stuff. But at the end of the day, this is this fundamental piece, right? So pattern is and it's very artistic, right? All kinds of, if you look at cultural clothing designs, like whether it's Native American Indians or from Africa, they all have patterns in them, right? Polynesia, they all have certain kinds of patterns. And so patterns is sort of ubiquitous. It appeals. Everybody has some understanding and some interest in it, right? But anyway, so we have this grid paper. We have these highlighters, four. We can only give each student four, right? So think of it, you have 30, right? There's a lot of highlighters. And so this one kid made a mistake in their pattern and ran out of and wanted a new piece of paper, and we were out. And the kid was a little bit on the spectrum and just collapsed onto the floor in tears.
Mm.
And it was so painful. And it was at that moment where I said, I'm going to build a web page that does exactly what this does, where you can select 8 colors. So we're not running out of highlighters. You're not running out of grid paper ever. I don't ever want to have this happen again. Right. So that was the sort of the origin story for this. And then for a lot of the other apps that I ended up building, right, is like I would be sitting watching kids struggle with something. And I go like, oh, if I could isolate this in something kind of fun, you could practice and get good at it. And so that led to then the next kind of app that I'm doing, and the next one, and the next one, and so on. So it's sort of like an organic uh, uh, evolving of all of this. And to tell you a little bit more about sort of the role of teachers and stuff, and the people skills and managing kids. So we did this afternoon uh, program, right, in my kids' elementary school, and there were about 30 kids in the after school program, and my wife and I did it together. And so we would have kids work together in teams and do presentations and stuff. And my wife knew the names of all the kids. She knew that these kids are goofing around and these kids are on task, and this is not a good fit for these two. I didn't know any of that. I was the tech guy. So when kids got stuck, they would raise their hand and I would kind of float around and say, oh, this is how you fix this. And my wife was on the other side of this, right? And so it's not my skill set to do what she does. And so in some sense, right, it is, and my wife was less technical about, though she had learned all this bricklayer stuff too, right? But so there is a very important role. If you see that access to information is not the bottleneck anymore, it is motivation and inspiration. That's what I want. That's what a coach does, right? And so, or you can call it a guide or whatever. They have different metaphors for this kind of stuff. But I think that yeah, it's interesting, what led to all of this, but this is sort of my origin story for that.
Some of the themes that I've heard in, especially your description of how you kind of arrived at this particular metaphor for programming. The themes that I heard, you tell me if you think this is correct. Number one, not in particular order. Number one, the visual nature of the work, the the reliance on patterns, which is how we kind of already think as humans. Um, when it came to engagement, it sounded like if and when you offered the learners um, the freedom to choose the output or the target that they were aiming at,
Mhm.
you got really good engagement because they were motivated and almost kind of driven by their desire to achieve that particular goal, and therefore maybe more willing. I'm extrapolating at this point, so you tell me if I'm getting off the mark. More willing to invest additional energy, additional effort into getting to that goal. The other thing that I heard was that you had to go, you saw in all of the experiences that you had that there was a need to give learners a place to experiment and be able to do it in such a way that if they made a mistake, they could back up, recover from it, and continue forward without having to start completely over or feeling like they failed to achieve that goal. Am I hearing things?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's a really good characterization of that. So I want to say, let me say a couple of things about visualization first, and then we'll get to this sort of confronting failure and exploring and stuff. But so visual skills, a lot of research shows that it is sort of at the foundation of mathematical expertise. A lot of research has also shown that visual skills, spatial reasoning and visual reasoning, this kind of stuff, spatial abilities can be developed and they're durable. So what that means is that you take an art class that will develop your certain spatial abilities, playing with blocks, playing Tetris, these types of games, uh, develop your spatial abilities and they stick with you. It's like riding a bike. So that's what durable means, right? And there's to some extent, transferable. Now, a number of years ago, they did this enormous longitudinal study. So I think it involved like 200,000 people over a 20-year, whatever time, time span. But the key takeaway from this study was that visual abilities are better predictors of success in the STEM disciplines than SAT scores, right? So it is at the heart of everything. Now with the one of the cool things about visual art, right, is depending on how open-ended it is, uh, wrong is not really quite wrong in the way you might think, right? The black square is a little over and I need to push it. I need to scooch it. There is still syntax errors, right? I did something fundamentally wrong. And so part of what like Bricklayer tries to do is help in all of that. So Bricklayer has a block-based programming language that uh, the new version. So I have a book uh, that does Bricklayer art with lesson plans and supplemental materials. That's free to everybody, right? And it studies sort of profound art forms. So neoplasticism. So this is Mondrian and Van Dozen, and then also the California hard edge movement that came out in the sort of early 60s or late 50s and goes off and does some other stuff as well. So it is real art, you're doing real things. What?
Where would I find the book?
I if I can send you links. So it's a PDF and stuff. And yeah, so sorry about that. I meant to put it on my on the website and it's on my to-do list. But anyway, so it's freely available. Um, but so we have so with this block-based language, right? The goal of that is to uh, and especially in this book, is that there is no mistake that you can make, that there isn't a clear thing that pops up right away that tells you how to fix it. So you're fitting puzzle pieces together, right? So it's pretty straightforward. And the block language for the book is a very simple one. Uh, but so it gets you, so provides, hopefully it's self-fixing, that if you make a mistake and the program doesn't run, you can see it right there. And so that takes sort of a lot of stress out of that whole problem. And then you still may build something that doesn't look quite right. And I claim that that is a wonderful thought exercise. So let me give you an example. So Piet Mondrian is considered one of the greatest artists of the 20th century. And you all probably have seen one of his images, right? It's rectangles with black lines separating things of primary colors like white. White isn't necessarily a color, but like red, a blue, and yellow, right? And so you have this, and they're very distinctive. And like his paintings, like one of them sold a couple years back for $50 million. So it's not just I'm saying this because I like Mondrian, but it is aligned. Mondrian as a style of art is aligned incredibly well with Bricklayer. And so what you do is he basically abstracted nature. That was the goal, right? So you can imagine a landscape where you have the horizon, you may have a tree sticking up and a river, maybe a bridge going over the river. So you turn that into sort of a partition with vertical and horizontal black lines, and then you fill in the rectangles with these primary colors. And so it is when you first look at some Mondrians and you go like, oh, when I first saw them, I go like, but it grows on you. It really does. And so there's a thing there, right? And so you look at these and you go like, well, I can create these in Bricklayer. This is easy to create something in that style. But what ends up happening if you do it, at least when I do it, I go like, oh, the proportions of these rectangles are not quite right. I don't like it. It has either too much symmetry or not enough symmetry in it, which is this, again, these properties of patterns and stuff. You go like, I want to break the symmetry here, but these two rectangles are the same width or height or something, and it kind of feels wrong. And so it's that sort of, so what you are doing is you're expressing your visual ideas, your creativity through code, because you have to know where in the code to go and how to modify it to get the visual thing that you are after. So it is super, I would say it's super fun, it's super fulfilling, and you learn stuff. You learn how to connect code, the symbolic representation of stuff, with what the code produces. So that's traceability, right? So you have this in regular coding too, right? If you have sort of traditional coding where it produces some numbers at the end, and one of these numbers is wrong, how do you find out what made that number go wrong, right? That's sort of the dry computer sciencey version of this. This is the art version of that, and it's dry on so fun. The art super fun.
I'm gonna share. We're gonna see if this will work, and I'm gonna ask my producer to edit around this so it works properly. But I wanna see if I can. Let's see if this will work. Mm, it will not. All right. I will. I want to make sure that when we get to this section, then you mentioned Mondrian art that there's at least some kind of reference
Yeah, yeah.
included.
So there's early Mondrian, and then there's the stuff that he's well known for, and you'll know it when you see it. But let me say a little bit more about the art stuff, right? So in the late 50s, right, they had this California hard edge where, again, it's this abstract kind of stuff. And so to create a hard edge, right, this is artistic stuff now, right? A soft edge is kind of blurry. And so if you have a picture, you could probably find one of these two, and I can send you one. You have a picture that has a flower in a field of flowers, and all of the flowers are blurry but one, because the camera has focused it in that way. Your eye is those are hard edges. Your eye is drawn to hard edges, right? And you can get into like, how do you create art with hard and soft edges? And so, for example, I think it was Da Vinci's Virgin on the Rocks or something like this is one of the most famous examples of this kind of using stark contrast. It's not just the hard edge, because you get into gradients. If you have colors that are too close to each other, that even though your eye kind of blurs them. And so now we're getting into this whole color theory stuff, right? This is like university level, potentially understanding of color. And so now you can kind of explore that space in art while you're writing code that achieves certain kinds of things, right? And so it is. I say this because if there are teachers listening, this textbook that I have hits a bunch of art standards and hits a bunch of coding standards too, right? So that's a shameless pitch. It's a free book, right? It's a free book, so it's not like I'm getting anything out of this. This is a labor of love.
When if with your permission, of course, when we post the interview, we can include. I'm pretty sure we could include just a link to the PDF.
Yeah,
That will
it's 3 links. It's yeah, I'll send you the links, then you can decide how to do this.
that'd be
Yes.
great. Okay, so let's go back to Bricklayer for a moment. We've talked about what it does, how it works, what the inspiration for it was, and I wondered if and we may have kind of talked all around this, but I have been wondering if you were going to describe Bricklayer, what it is today, to a parent or a teacher. What would you say to them that was kind of concise and and easy enough that they would be able to remember it and be able to rattle it off themselves? Because, for example, you mentioned pixel art.
Yeah.
Oh, and I wondered if there was a way to describe, Bricklayer, again, to a teacher or a parent in a way that would just click immediately because it would evoke a picture.
Right. So I think pixel art is a good one. If you had to just sort of remember one thing, it'd be pixel art and Minecraft, right?
Okay.
So, uh, so you write code that creates those things. Now, pixel art generally doesn't have a pattern, right? It's usually people or something like this. Uh, spa- Early video games, right? So in this book, the origin of pixel art is early video games, and the killer, the one that changed everything, was Space Invaders, which has an amazing story, right? And so what they did with pixel art back then, it was of necessity. They only had this low resolution on the screen, and they had to somehow get animations so they created sort of these stick figures that would sort of move, right? Sort of two poses that would alternate, and the person would walk across the screen or whatever. And but since then, it's become an art form in its own right. So it's a thing, right? That's sort of transcended this limitation. But the origin story of pixel art is simply fascinating, right? And so what you can do, yeah. So there's all kinds of sort of historical background, whether it's Mario Brothers, the original, and things like this. You go back to 8-bit games, right? So, which I say this because kids like this kind of stuff. This is motivating to say, like, your coding exercise today is to do Mario or one of the mushrooms or whatever it is, right? Those are motivating, fun assignments rather than we're going to write a Python program that, does something with numbers, right? So very motivating. Pixel art is a good one. A really fun thing for teachers with pixel art, and this is maybe, well, a fun one is a group project where you get a pixel art image, a big one, because if you Google pixel art now, like on Google Images and stuff, you can find pixel art that has thousands of pieces in it, right? And so the book has a whole chapter on how to do pixel art. But you take an image like this, you cut it up into 4 pieces, you give each piece to a kid, and you say, now work together. Because I want you to code this up. I want you to then print out. Ideally, you'd combine the code. That's maybe a little bit too technical. But you print out what they combined and you glue it back together. And it's not, there's some tricks there, right? You have to, first of all, let me just say, you have to agree on what blue is. What shade of blue are you using? If the image has blue that goes across and I cut it, and this person says, well, I think this blue is that one, and the other person in a different room says, I think this blue is this slightly different one, that doesn't quite work. It's not a horrible failure, right? But it is they have to talk, they have to coordinate. Yeah, it's an interesting Pac-Man. No, the Pac-Man ghost. That's a very nice pixel art one because you can cut. Yeah, everybody gets one ghost, and then somebody gets the front Pac-Man. But then with the ghosts and stuff, or with Pac-Man, you say like, geez, I don't want to just do individual pixels. It would be nice if I could do a circle.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're talking about geometric primitives, circles, rectangles, lines, these types of things, cubes, right? So it kind of the desire to have a better paintbrush just spontaneously kind of happens as you have more and more ideas. And then when that happens, you go like, okay, good. We have the next programming thing that I'm teaching here. Now you can do circles or you could do rings.
Are those you've described several hands-on,
Mhm.
not experiments, but activities. Are those necessary precursors to engaging Bricklayer? Are those part of leading up to using the application and using it online?
There is, so the first thing that so here's the thought experiment. I give you a Lego base plate, a 32 by 32, which, fun fact, has 1024 little knobs on it. 1024 is 2 to the power 10 is 1K. So from a computer science point of view, this is a very special number. So it's just kind of fun fact. A 32 by 32 Lego base plate. You then give kids standard Lego bricks, 2 by 4s, blue, different colors, the various standard shapes. And you can say, build something, anything, right? It could be a pattern, it could be a house, whatever it is you want to build. It's flat, it's 2-dimensional. You then have to write a set of instructions that you can hand to another kid so that they could recreate what you just built. So they don't get to see it. It's not visual. It is symbolic computation, right? You have to describe symbolically, not visually, to a fellow human being how to build this. And so now you get into this problem that if I have a brick like this, one of these ones, there's the orientation. When I say place it here, what does that mean?
Mhm.
Place it at the low, so you might, if you're very computer sciencey, right, you might say, I want the lower left corner of the brick to be at the lower left corner of this spot, right? But you very quickly get into coordinates, right? Where you say, I have a coordinate system, I have a point of reference for each brick has its coordinate, right? And so now you start saying, okay, I'm going to communicate in those terms, right? And I have to be able to communicate symbolically to a fellow human. So Bricklayer has a bunch of apps that lets you play with that and get good with it, right? So it takes you from baby steps to the whole thing, and they're all self-grading. Teachers can give tests. The students can print down the solutions of their tests, their scores, and send them to the teacher, and the kids can take the tests as many times as they want. So now if you're talking about mastery-based learning rather than just test stuff, right? So you can do all of this, and then once they're good with this, then I say like, okay, cool. So now I'm going to give you some programming primitives that let you build rectangle where we describe the location, the dimensions, and the color. And then poof, there you have it. There's your first one. And every time you put one of these, you get to run your code and see what happens.
Hmm.
So if you're building something wrong initially, right? Later, when we get into text-based programming, it gets more advanced, right? But you have this where you get instant feedback. You see when something is building the right way. You start reasoning about stuff. You do a lot of positional stuff, and it's harder than you think. Um, because of what's known as an off by one error, right? So the off by one error problem goes all the way back to Rome. Imagine I have uh, fence posts that are, fence that has fence posts 10 yards apart, and I have a piece of property that's 100 yards long. How many fence posts on that side? Or tell me about the fence. How many planks connecting them? Because you're going to have one more fence post than planks.
Okay.
That's the off by. Another example of this is when I send to the printer, print pages 5 through 8. How many pages get sent out? Is it 3? Or is it 4?
Right.
That's the off by one problem. And so you confront that a lot. That is a nemesis of computer science, is the off by one problem, right? So this gets you very in tune with this right away. Thinking ahead, right? All of this kind of coordinate stuff, when you talk about game development, if you like, for kids that are interested, so I do Unity games and stuff like this. All of it is coordinates, right? It's like so for me, transitioning from Bricklayer to this Unity stuff. Yeah, Unity has a bunch of stuff that Bricklayer, but the coordinate stuff, I know forwards and backwards, right? I have an intimate understanding of that. So it has a nice trajectory going outside of this.
So how would I've got like 3 questions that I want to ask, and I don't want to jam them all into the same sentence. Um, what age what age student is Bricklayer geared for? How does assuming that it's being used by a teacher, how would a teacher get started, and what kind of learning curve is involved? And then how does it get what's the best way of embedding it into the educational organization so that the implementation becomes part of the curriculum?
Right. So, we've done a number of events, over the years and stuff, and we've done things at schools and also at like science fairs or whatever. And so we would have different kinds of activities, and one of them was create a fractal on a Lego base plate. So it's a very specific one, and it's tricky. But we have had kids that are 5 years old that can do this. Not all kids, right? And we hadn't worked with them long. So, but I believe that you can teach this stuff at very early age. Uh, I would say that, when you get more into the numbers and stuff, I would say 4th grade is a good sort of place. That's where this kind of stuff is kind of makes more sense, right? The numerical side of this, but the visual side you can do before, and we have, right? So all of this kind of stuff does work, and we've done it. The web page and the book in particular, with the lesson plans is supposed to be self-teaching, right? So the teacher could. The goal is meant that this book is supposed to make it desirable for teachers to want to teach it. If you have sort of, I'm always willing to help, subject to time constraints, right? So we've done free workshops for teachers and stuff like this, and I could meet with teachers via Zoom if they want to get going with this. So I'm very supportive, subject to time constraints. But yeah, so it should be a self. There's enough web apps there that will teach you how to do stuff, that if you go through this stuff yourself, you'll totally get it. Like in uh, this one with the coordinate systems, right? It starts out, the first one just says, place a green brick at these 7 different locations. And then it will grade it right away. You submit it, and it will tell you whether you got it right or not. If you got it wrong, it'll give you the buzzer. And if you give up, you can say, show the solution. And so it'll show you, right? So again, the goal was to make it so that if you want to learn, you can learn by yourself. And then, but so you go through these things, and the teachers don't even have to, because of that, they don't necessarily have to even be able to answer any of these questions themselves. I mean, obviously, it's good for them to have some understanding of this, but it's not like, my sense was the big fear that teachers typically had was, I can't get this to work. And usually that uh, brings to mind a syntax error. I forgot a comma somewhere in the program, and it says fails to compile, right? And that is just that's terrifying all the way around, right? Even for people in the business. So, so this one was a thing that we really tried to pay a lot of attention to. That it's not, you don't get confronted with that, right? And so since the book part, to be honest, since it is just 2D, it's very, you can then go to 3D from the website, but the book itself is just 2D. Stuff in 3D is way harder, because what ends up happening, so we provide enough tools like grids where you can build stuff and change the size, move things around. All of this kind of stuff is to make all of this sort of a trial. You can do trial and error and figure out stuff, right? And so when you do 3D, you can't, right? Because I can't do this I could do a 3D thing, but it would be harder. But the idea is, so imagine you just have a 2D grid, and I need to create 2 rectangular prisms that are touching in the back corner, the top back and the bottom front of this other one. You can't, and let me make them big. Each one of these rectangles has dimensions like 50 by 74 and stuff like this. So now to find out what that position is back there, you can't just count it out easily, right? So now it becomes you have to become math at that point. That's when math has to kick in, right? And so
Weird threshold.
yeah. And it is a big bump for most people. But this 2D stuff, you can always brute force it. You could just count across, provided the things are small enough, right? So like a typical kind of here's a fun exercise. You have 2 grids, two rectangles that are sort of overlapping, right? And you would like to mix the colors of the 2 in the overlap section. So if you have a blue and yellow one, you get green at this overlapping section. Are you with me? Right. So now we're talking about color theory, and like how do you have additive or subtractive colors? So you can go way down that rabbit hole if you're an art teacher, right? So this also has opportunities for this kind of thing. But on this overlapping part, you have to calculate what that intersection is, right? And so if it's small, you can just count it out. You can just say like, okay, I see it's right here. So this is 5 in and 7 up. That's where I need to kind of create my next rectangle that's green, right? That's where I need to create this. And you can kind of see that if you make it too big, it kind of flops off the edge. So that's too much. You can kind of dial it back. You can kind of go. So that's sort of a trial and error thing where you can overcome this. But if this rectangle has dimensions of, 200 by 300, then you can't, right? So it's a brute force versus brains. So initially you can count it out and work it out. And the cool thing about your brain, right, is it's lazy. It will want to figure out a shorter way to do this. So you give it enough of these things, and at some point it goes like, oh, here's the shortcut. So it just kind of gives it to you. And so there is this trade-off, right? And the nice thing about that is it's not an all or nothing thing, right? There's a kid who can figure this out right away, who sees this math stuff, and they're good. And then there's somebody else who's kind of struggling with math who's determined. And we'll say, I will count this up and I'm going to count the next one up. And pretty soon I understand the pattern of how I'm counting these things, right? Eventually. And so that's kind of the sweet spot, because you can bring everybody along, and because it's art, you can have college students and elementary school kids draw a face. Just the level of complexity is going to be different.
Right.
So you can have them in the same room, right? So this is the problem sometimes with teaching, right? Where you have uh, some students that are way ahead of other students and some are that are too far behind. And how do you teach? You sort of teach to the middle, and this is kind of not helping anybody. But if you say create a pattern, you will have if you have some math whizzes in there and stuff like this, they will create an unbelievable patterns for you. And then somebody at the other end of the scale may create a variation of a checkerboard pattern, which is cool, right? They're all kind of seeing stuff, and you can engage them all. And if they're properly motivated, they're at least trying. So it becomes like PE a little bit. You get an A for effort, right?
Right.
Yeah, and of course you can push things a little bit more than that, but that's sort of, in some sense, that's the hope of the art element to it too.
But push in for me on the implementation in a classroom, and in particular, let's kind of cover how would we help? How would you help a teacher who's looking at what might look like a steep learning curve? How would you help that teacher implement this in a way that you kind of remove that barrier that you were describing earlier, where it's like, what do I do if or when I can't get something to work? Is there a combination of, using the book, specific lesson plans? Is there a place for artificial intelligence in this?
So yeah, so the the hard part, right, in some sense, is the something isn't working. What exactly that means, right? So I think that when it comes, at least for the book part, when it comes to the block programming language, is very straightforward. Uh, that one I believe is fixed, because if you build something wrong, it'll pop up and say, "This is what you did. This is how you fix it." Right. So it does it with a picture that's not the exact code that you wrote, but of the exact problem that you have. Right. So there's that part, I believe, is sort of handled. The other part where, but let me say something about these blocks, these program blocks. Each of them links to a short video that walks you through how they work. So you have like a little mini tutorial. Now the problem is, let me just tell you another problem that comes with this is when you are these are YouTube videos, right? So if you are in a classroom, a YouTube most likely is going to be blocked from your list, because students and YouTube bad, this kind of thing. So uh, or there's a threat, let's say, and I get it. So I'm not saying that the school shouldn't do this, but so it has to be, this site has to be unlocked, right? It has to be permitted. Those are just extra fun, just sort of adding on top of all of the challenges. You have this kind of stuff, but so you have these little videos for these kind of things. You have web apps that teach you about all of the other stuff, and they go they get successively harder. So there's many, 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 many of these. You can do as many or as little as you want. But the idea is that getting through and each one of these apps focuses on a specific kind of understanding, right? So over time, you get this, uh, that should give you enough to be able to solve all of those kinds of problems, at least for the book part. I'm saying this because when you get to the text-based Bricklayer programming, the sky is the limit. You literally can do, when I said computational science and stuff like this, you literally can express anything you want in this space. So that's a little different. One has to be more contained, or more deliberate about that stuff. But this book is designed not to be that, right? And so I'm imagining, maybe, let's say a kid is doing an art thing and they want to move a circle, or they want to move something somewhere and it's not working. So I would imagine that would be the place where the student says, "Oh, it's not looking right. This, whatever, the smile on my smiley face isn't right." Uh, I guess you still are kind of a little bit, uh, uh, one could talk about specific problems or specific guidelines. But I'd say beyond that, it would be like isolating. There'd be techniques like one could have a to-do list, like check this, check that. Because like one of the things that you can do is you can disable blocks, so it'll take out as if that code didn't get executed. So you can kind of like the goal would be to isolate that piece and then just tweak the numbers, right? Move it around and stuff. And that moving around initially is just trial and error. Just and then eventually you get tired of the trial and error and you decide, if I think about this just a little bit before, it's the measure twice, cut once kind of a thing, right? You think a little bit and you get rewarded for that, right? So it does sort of naturally, I would say, gravitate towards that kind of a sweet spot. The assignments are meant to be very, very, uh, I think, manageable. My goal was to make this fun for the teachers also, not just the students. And to, but there are fascinating, like one thing that I would like to say a little bit about pixel art is, and this relates directly to software construction, right? The problem with pixel art is making mistakes, right? Is that it is how do you go about, I have this image of a person or a flower, right, with lots of different colors and stuff. How do I go, what is my organizational principle for building this, for coding this, right? So what kids will do typically, one of them is I'm going to pretend I have a crayon in my hand and I'm going to do the outline first, and then I'm going to color in the pieces, right? That's kind of mapping it directly into the physical space. The problem is that's not a good way to do it. And the reason why is because you have to imagine you have sort of an outline of something, and your next job is put a red triangle right, a red rectangle right here. And you go like, well, how do I know where here is? Well, you got to count it all up. Are you kidding me? Every single time. And so the right way to do pixel art, if beyond a certain level of complexity, right? So if for simple ones, you go like, I see it, I can do it. Uh, like Space Invaders is generally of that kind. Or the ghosts from Pac-Man and stuff. Those are kind of, you can see them all at once. But for complicated ones, beyond some level of complexity, you do one row at a time. And every time, you just kind of double check, you kind of do it. And so that is the most reliable. I had a kid, and you can do one column at a time too, right? So this is just good. This is human processes. Because the error lies on my side on this, right? So I got to do something that's very reliable. So there was a kid who was doing this, wanted to do, I think it was a mushroom from Mario, and he couldn't do it. It just kept coming out wrong, and he was crying. Like it was this, I've had it. And I said, no, 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 no. Here's how you do it. And then I showed him this. Ta-da, So yeah, it's fun actually for me, that was a fun moment to actually be able to teach, right? That's it's kind of what teachers live for, is you made a difference. So that was,
You mentioned
what?
go ahead.
No, that's all. Yeah, that's all today.
You've mentioned working directly with what sounds like, somewhere middle school age, maybe high school age kids. And I have found myself wondering, as I understand it, Bricklayer is a nonprofit. Is that correct? Okay, so how does a nonprofit engage schools and get this embedded in the schools? Is it personal outreach? Are you going to conferences? Are people coming?
Yeah, this is a great question that I wish I had a good answer to. And, as I've already kind of mentioned earlier, my people skills is not my strength. The problem with the school system, and it's enormous, right? And it's for good reason. So I'm not picking on the school system, but let me kind of tell you what I've learned, and that is, so public schools typically they're held to these learning standards, so Common Core and stuff like this, right? And so they generally do not have a lot of free time in their lesson plans to do anything, because they're going to be measured by this set of exams, and that's it. And so to try to fit this in there, a teacher basically would say, how does this benefit what I'm being measured against, right? So if I do this with my kids and their math scores go down or whatever it is, I will be punished. If I do this to my kids and the scores go up a little bit, great, but it's not a big deal. And it's a lot of work on my part. So how does this make sense? Right. So that's kind of at the heart of the problem. So when Bricklayer it's been most successful in uh, gifted programs because they have flexibility, right? So we did have somebody who did Bricklayer for a couple of years at a high school, and you know he's a great guy. He embraced tech, got better and better, got more comfortable with all of this tech stuff, and now has left the school for a much, much higher paying job in the tech industry, right? This is the glass ceiling that I kind of was, uh, that's out there that it's very hard to solve this coding problem in a model that requires teachers to become computer science experts, right? This is so what you kind of have to solve it in a way that teachers can do what teachers are good at without having to learn, this new kind of stuff to extreme levels, right? So there's that. So getting it into this in a public school system is incredibly difficult. Private schools are much more flexible, but they typically are ahead of the curve on a lot of this. So they typically have hired uh, a team of people, and that team can include PhDs and stuff that come with their own things that they want to do, right? So they're like, this is what I want to do. I don't, yeah, your idea is great, but I have already my own ideas, right? You sort of have that. And then I would say if you get to religious schools, they also have more flexibility, right? So it is an unfortunate with the public school system. It's unfortunate that they're slow moving. Uh, I do understand the way it's set up. There's kind of not what are the options, right? And it's also, I think, when it comes to teaching, and this is a good thing, but there's the pros and cons to whatever you do, right? But if you say like whatever we teach has to be taught in the entire district across all the schools. Well, so now you've created so if you have sort of you're working with one person or one person is up for this, it's not going to fly unless everybody can do it, right? Which is okay. I do get that. I think it's the better of the two choices, but that still doesn't mean I have to be okay with this choice. And the problem that's happening with computer science, sort of a new kid on the block, right, in the educational space, not so new anymore, right? But when Bricklayer started, it was that was the reason was because it's kind of the new kid on the block. And going forward now with generative AI, right? So computer science is sort of, Moore's law. You have sort of this exponential growth that the most amazing advance of anything in the history of mankind happening. And now and that was too fast. The school system has a tough time keeping up with this because they move in larger time frames, right? They move generationally, kind of. Uh, but there's at least some hope for the computer science stuff keeping up, keeping sort of within what's current. Where with generative AI, it is moving so fast that it makes Moore's law look like nothing, right? And so you're having this stuff where things have to happen so quickly, and this large organization is not a school thing. Large organizations are sluggish; they don't move quickly. It's like a giant river, and you want to change the direction of the river. You can do this gradually, right? So it's very very hard. Uh, I don't know how. I'm always up. If any teachers, school people out there want to explore any of this stuff, I'm all ears. Hopefully, you'll know where to find me from this podcast. Yeah.
So, since you mentioned AI, let's shift a little bit to the future. I'm really curious about your take on, given everything that we've talked about, given your background and how you've described, how we're visual learners and how a lot of, kind of programming at a certain level, there's a threshold beyond which it requires a lot of, kind of, mathematical expertise. Um, given what is kind of this trend toward vibe coding and this,
Mhm.
um, this effort to make coding available to anybody who can, create a
Mhm.
prompt. But what's your take on that? How are you gonna handle that? Yeah.
I am uh, a really big Star Trek fan, especially the original series. And I tell you that when ChatGPT arrived on the scene, I was on the deck of the Enterprise at that point. It is just, it's like the moment I've been waiting for my whole life, kind of. And so I tell people that I work with this technology all day, every day, right? And so, and that's fairly close to the truth, right? So I've given some keynotes on generative AI at various conferences and stuff. I teach 2 generative AI classes at our university. I was involved with the creation of the first bachelor's in AI in the state of Nebraska and in the region, for that matter. That just became official in the spring. So we had our first group of students join the program this spring. And I've been sort of yelling at the rooftops of this technology since the very beginning, because I've seen all of this stuff, this story play out before with computers and chess. If you want an analogy, like, so when computers first came out, they said if they could just play chess at the level of a 5-year-old, it'll demonstrate intelligence, right? That would be the sort of the litmus test. And then when computers could do this, they kept moving the goalposts back, right? And so we're into the 80s at this point. Computers are pretty good, but the chess community is very competitive, right? And so computers are worthless. They're no good. They'll never be any good. Never, ever, 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 right? Like this. But we could all see the trajectory. The computer science people could, right? And I used to play a lot of chess too, right? So I followed this closely. And in 1996, Garry Kasparov, right, world champion back then, amazing chess player. He said a computer would never. At this point, the goalpost had moved. That the only way a computer could demonstrate intelligence was if it beat every last person on Earth. Only then. And in 1996, Garry Kasparov said, computer will never be world champion because it lacked a soul. And when you play the soul card, that's your last card. You got nothing past that. And he lost the very next year, was contentious, all this kind of stuff. But so now flash forward to 2016 with Alpha Zero. So Alpha Zero uses machine learning, which is an entirely different kind of AI. This is the generative AI kind of stuff. And it taught itself to play chess with no training data, zero, just the rules of the game. Within 24 hours, was the strongest chess engine the world had ever seen. It plays chess at a level that humans don't understand. Not even the grandmaster. They don't understand how they can do what they do. Is it intelligent, or have we moved the goalpost? So I'm seeing this same story again, right? The story with ChatGPT when it first came out. Oh, it's kind of okay. It's like I ask it to write a poem for me, and it's not that great. I've seen this, and then the next one comes out, and you can see how much better it is. And if you work with it a lot, you can feel it, right? You experience this, but you only experience this if you are engaging with it at its frontier of its capabilities, right? If you just say, write a birthday card for me, and I give you ChatGPT 4 and ChatGPT 5, you may not be able to tell a difference. And to you, nothing has changed, right? Especially if you're cynical about this, right? But so I feel it because I do vibe coding. I develop, and I'm pushing the limits. Like, it's starting to struggle here. And then when the next model comes out, it's like, oh my God, I can't believe what just happened. It's like that, right? So I feel it, and it's Christmas. It's like Christmas to me. But so you see this trajectory, and people, even in the tech space, they don't want to believe it. This is just like chess. They don't want to believe it, and they don't want to take steps to adapt to it. Like, it is there's some challenges out there, but it's moving. And the problem, of course, it's moving so fast, right? It's we have our traditional way of doing things, and we have a bunch of classes, we have a bunch of textbooks, we have a bunch of curriculums and assignments and stuff. This whole thing is going to get upended. And so, to make it worse, right, is like, so we need to adapt in the right way. There are things that humans need to understand, right? That they bring to the table. You're talking about creativity, the ability to express ideas, English, this kind of stuff. uh, there's a bunch of things that humans bring to the table that they have to have, and then there's a bunch of things that they no longer need. Like, we don't really need to worry about the syntax of programming languages that much anymore. That's kind of, and we used to spend a lot of time developing fluency in speaking that language, right? Think of it as you're a translator, and you say, like, you have to learn 5 languages fluently, and now Google Translate comes along. You still have to learn how to translate, but you don't have to worry about these languages anymore. That you're not So it's like that, right? But the problem, or the fear, at least my fear, is if you make a big shift and you get it wrong, you have created harm, right? And so that's scary. So then the status quo is like, okay, the status quo has kind of been good. Let's be tentative. In some sense, it's why in the political realm, why incumbents get elected, right? It's the fear of the unknown. And so we kind of are confronted with that. So the people that want to move me, right? I'm kind of like, I'm keeping an eye on this, but I can advance a little bit. I feel afraid for certain. I feel I don't understand it fully, right? The implications of stuff. And then you have another wave that I don't want to do anything different from what I'm doing. I like what I'm doing. I don't want to change. And then there's people that are uh, threatened by it, right? They say if it's taking my job, and so I don't want to have anything to do with it. I don't want to let it through the door. And that's dangerous, right? I feel like it is. I don't feel it's going to take my job yet because I keep doing bigger and bigger things with it, right? But yes, we have to rise to the occasion, right? If these things are getting smarter and smarter to make us our value added, we have to kind of become more ambitious, and that's a big mental shift because we're all kind of used to. I would say we've got our wonder beaten out of us as adults. When you're a kid, you have wonder and everything is possible. You can have a castle flying in the clouds, right? And reality sets in, and that muscle in your brain has kind of atrophied. We need that back. We need that back. Because now and I keep trying to search for metaphors that people could relate to, but imagine I give you a magic wand. What do you do with that at work, right? If I give you a magic wand at work, I'm going to keep doing the exact same thing, just easier. Is that how you're going to use that magic wand? And now let's say next year, what it was in Harry Potter, the Nimbus 2000, and then it became the Nimbus 3000, the broom, right? So next year I give you the level, year 1, you have a level 2 magic wand. And then the next year I give you a level 8 magic wand. Are you still going to do the same stuff with those magic wands, right? And the answer is not if you're a true wizard, right? Now, you have to do something with this new magic wand that you couldn't have done with the other one, right? And that's sort of but that's what makes it fun, though, too. We're living in really, really interesting and exciting times where these kind of magic wands, if an idea pops into your head, a lot of people don't have tech skills and they have wonderful ideas. And they go, God, if I could just, I don't know how to make this happen. Now you can. Now you can.
That is a wonderful note to end our conversation on. It is both uplifting, and it is a little bit, even, it offers a different perspective even from some of the other ed tech, folks I've spoken to who are a little bit concerned about AI and how to integrate it into education most especially. They're trying to bridge that gap between making sure that there's a human intermediary between, the AI and the learner. Your picture of your portrayal of the opportunity that's there, is encouraging. Thank you, Dr. Winter. I appreciate
You're
the
welcome.
comment.
Glass half full guy.
I can tell. If our listeners wanted to connect with you or with Bricklayer, how would they do that? Where would they find you?
Email is the best. So it would be victor.winter@bricklayer.org.
Okay.
So yeah.
So, uh, listeners, thank you for joining us today. We explored Dr. Winter's journey from computer science professor to the founder of bricklayer.org. Again, this is a platform that reimagines how students learn to code. We discuss the role of creativity and thinking in education, how Students are motivated when they are given opportunities to learn in a more risk-free environment where mistakes are okay. And we also talked a little bit about how a nonprofit model fits into making education, it's most especially computer science education, more accessible to everyone.
Thanks for tuning in. If today's conversation sparked new insights or challenged your thinking, we'd love to hear from you.
Visit flexion.us for more information and join us here next time on Chalk and Code.